equated violent extremism with Islamist jihadist groups. The story was told over and over of how terrorism in the United States had dropped out of a clear blue September sky. It would take another day of national trauma, nearly 20 years on, for many Americans to see what statistics showed and what people of color had long known from experience. The most serious terrorist threat is not foreign, dark, and Muslim, but white and American-made. Like the babysitter in the horror movie who realizes the serial killer isn't in the woods, but inside the house, the country has finally begun to recognize the proximity of violent extremists. Our most serious threats are internal, not external, observed former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel. Politically inspired armed insurgents, extremists, fascist groups, and other active destructive forces are now part of the American landscape. As we saw in last week's attack and occupation of America's symbolic cradle of our democracy, the Capitol building. As the country grapples with how to respond to the problem of domestic political violence, questions abound. How do we balance national security with individual freedoms? Are there ways to teach people to embrace a muscular pluralism or even just tolerance? What should be the role of the government in creating deradicalization programs? What's the line between legitimate political dissent and a threat to society? Homeland Security investigates how people in other countries, and briefly a handful of American deradicalization pioneers, have grappled with such questions. I talked to policemen and politicians, neurologists and social workers, the mothers of ISIS militants, about what propels people toward violent extremism. I went to Indonesia and Pakistan to see how communities rehabilitated terrorists who weren't foreigners but neighbors and relatives. In Denmark and Belgium, I met police officers who crafted an innovative program for former extremists, dismissed by its critics as hug a terrorist. In Belgium, I interviewed a mayor who was finding ways to stop citizens from becoming radicalized. In Germany, a nation whose reckoning with its Nazi past has put it at the vanguard of rehabilitation efforts, I learned about both the possibilities and the limits of its 720 deradicalization programs. Along the way, I met people who'd pursued vile plans, whether plotting to blow up the Long Island Railroad or to knife protesters in a peaceful procession. I emerged having learned new ways to think about terrorism and extremism, but also with a curious yet marked feeling of optimism. Around the world, people are experimenting with humane and innovative alternatives to the traditional remedies of prisons and armed response. Many of the solutions I describe here may seem radical, but as the cultural critic Raymond Williams once observed, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. But I get ahead of myself. A week spent in Texas, a few days after Donald Trump's inauguration, began the journey that would eventually become this book. A Dallas group interested in international affairs had invited me to speak about the subject of my first book, If the Oceans Were Ink. I was hoping the evening would be a refuge from all the talk in the news that winter about hatred, high walls, and closed borders. And when I walked in, the first signs were reassuring. In a building designed by I.M. Pei, a soigné crowd picked at cheese and fruit. The group's president, a banker, chatted in French with a Parisian. A Palestinian-American doctor and an Algerian-American businesswoman conferred about an upcoming fundraising gala. My book was stacked on Formica tables, manned by a cheerful young bookshop employee with a beard and a baggy T-shirt. Oceans told the story of my friendship and studies of the Quran with a traditional Islamic scholar. It had been an attempt to trace where my own worldview, as a secular American feminist, converged with and diverged from that of a madrasa-trained conservative from rural India. Much to my surprise, the two of us had found common ground, a spacious plot of shared morals. We both believed in the value of democracy, science, reason, pluralism, and human rights, and we had the same commitment to raising strong and